Azul is a modern classic of board gaming. It sort of hit on the scene around 2018, I think, maybe a little bit earlier, as various different iterations, and it's now come out with Azul Duel, a two-player only version, which we're going to play tonight. It has a lot of mechanics that are fairly similar to the base and the other Azuls in terms that you are drafting tiles, very colourful pattern pieces that are nice sort of aesthetically and also to hold, which is always nice for board gaming. There's a couple little wrinkles to make it a bit more complicated and to keep people engaged because it's a two-player duel game. More important than the game, though, is my guest tonight. I've got joined by Maggie Kirkman. Maggie, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Well, so part of the reason, there's two reasons I've asked you. The first is you've written this book recently, Time of Our Lives, which is celebrating older women and stories, 20 stories of older women who achieved really interesting and engaging things throughout their lives and also in their later years, which is impressive. The other reason I've asked you is also because you're Alice's mum. Alice has obviously been on the show a number of times, friend of the show. Can you tell me about this book?
I wanted to write it, particularly as I got older, and I was 75 when that was published. I'm now nearly 78, as it happens, because I saw that so many people just looked at old women and they saw old, nothing else. And I think completely forgot that behind that old facade was a long and interesting life. Even if people hadn't done things for which they're famous, most women have done interesting things. And when I look at young people dismissing old people, I think, well, that old person has probably done already all the things you've done, plus more, and have had time to think about it. But also, why diss old age? Because if you're very lucky, you will also be old. And don't trash your future like that. So that was one of the reasons. And as I found the first few women, they found others for me, or people heard about it and contacted me. So I've ended up with women from all over Australia, from different kinds of backgrounds, and women whose lives I think are absolutely fascinating, even though most of them said, oh, I haven't had an interesting life, you won't be interested in me. But they all do. I think you've read some of them and you agree, don't you, Liam?
Yeah, I'm only this far into the book, but I've been sort of interested in, and sort of it's one of those things with reading a book where I both want to race through it, but also I want to savor it at the same time.
Oh, fantastic.
Is a sort of a sign of a good book. We've been drafting the tiles and sort of putting them here, which I think is very familiar for most people who have played Azul. The difference here is we're building out our board rather than having the colourful pattern, so you can sort of choose how you want to lay it out with these, which you can buy up to 2 a turn. One thing I noted in the book is you've got stories of women who later in life have sort of changed course a little bit, and you've also got stories of people who have sort of in their older age sort of seen the accumulation of their life's work sort of not necessarily peak but sort of head in the same direction. Was there a choice to feature sort of both stories? I
began with the idea of women who had taken up something new, but maybe after all their children had left home or they'd been widowed or something like that, because they were the first few that I knew about. The one in particular that I'm thinking about is Jacqueline Dwyer, who started a master's degree. I think she was 85, and travelled from Sydney to Canberra to do it at ANU, and then published a book about it, and that was on her family history, the French wool trade in Australia. And she was amazing. She had supported her children, her 5 children, and her husband until then, and then really blossomed very earnestly. She was a very serious intellectual person. I didn't ever actually meet her. I interviewed one of her sons and a granddaughter, and I read all of her writing, and I talked to another mature age student who'd got to know her, and her supervisor had written an article about her, which is quite unusual. So I began with her. All the others I met in person. So I thought many would be like her, taken up things late in life, but then I found others who had kind of dabbled, but then had an opportunity to focus as they grew older, or maybe had done something different. And there's a woman in her 90s who's become a tutor. She's very deaf, found it hard to continue ordinary teaching, but she can tutor students who are having difficulty at school, and she has her own business, some of which she does online and some in person, and is doing that very well into her 90s.
They're not quite the same age, but I found with my parents as they retired, they go, oh, we can relax. And then a month later, they're going, we are so bored.
Yes.
And then threw themselves into various different things. And so like my mum started sewing and patchworking and then joined the club and then decided they'd help out the club, and now she's the president. And then Dad started to go back and do study like landscape gardening. So it's sort of interesting where you have that time. Sometimes you have the freedom and that time to then follow pursuits that you might not have been able to do. And obviously we've seen with older women, there is maybe with that generation more, there's the expectation of maybe not studying, looking after the family, and not having those freedoms when they were younger.
That is true, and I was looking at what was called the silent generation. So they're the generation before the baby boomers, and baby boomers are 1946 to 1964. So it was women born before 1946, a few of them in 1930, so they were really quite old. And yes, they took up sometimes hobbies, but sometimes businesses. There is quite a lot of evidence to show that you will age more healthily and better if you feel that there is meaning in your life, and you can create meaning through family, volunteering, paid employment, whatever, but having meaning in your life, as well as having exercise and socializing. They seem to be the main things that contribute to leading long and interesting lives, and that's what these women were doing in very different ways. I mean, a couple of them came from quite privileged backgrounds, but others came from poverty to the extent of not wearing shoes and living in a tent, and others struggled throughout their lives or had lives that had difficulties and tragedies. So I wanted to give people the idea that there are these stories about these women, but if you know older women and start talking to them about their lives, you might find that it's worth listening to.
One of the early women featured is an Indigenous woman who talks about being an elder.
Yes.
And I thought that was really interesting because I think it sort of kind of makes maybe the point of the book a little bit, where elders are taking on a big community responsibility as they age, rather than retiring and taking less responsibility. They have a huge impact on their community. And I think that's sort of interesting. I think when you see a lot of these women were having a big impact on the community in their later years.
That was Miriam Ungenmer-Baumann, and she was Australian of the Year, Older Australian of the Year, I think in 2021, if I've got my dates correct. It could be in 2022. But because of that, she had the opportunity to go from Central Australia, where she was brought up and where she lived, to speak to groups all around the country. And she said they were mostly old people, and she told me that she would say to them, we have elders, you are all elders, you should be respected, and you have a lot to contribute. And she was very clear on that. And she'd been literally born by the side of the Daly River, and I don't mean in a hospital next to the Daly River, but by the side of the Daly River, and had been brought up initially to be a servant. And she was working in the house of one of the teachers who saw that she was able to read, who then took her in to be an assistant teacher, and she ended up the principal of her school and the first fully trained Indigenous woman in, I think, all of Australia. Yeah, she was very impressive.
Okay. Well, look, that's after 2 rounds, Maggie, and you are beating me. I think you're 12
That's a
to
surprise.
8. Maybe I'd have more luck in the later rounds. Who knows? But so far, you are solidly ahead. Thank you for coming down and playing Azul Jewel, but more importantly, thank you for talking about your book.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Liam, and thank you, Alice, for helping me learn to play.
Good old Alice.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Liam.